Confession 2, Release Planning Peril. The sprint planning meeting is the most crucial meeting when it comes not only to getting commitment from the team, but also to giving everyone an understanding of the features that they'll be working on. In a similar vein, the release planning meeting is a helpful way to give the whole Scrum team an overview of the next release. The following story shows how one or two bad decisions can put this important meeting at risk. The team were ready for their first release planning meeting. Given that we were planning the first ever release, this meeting was more important for us than it was for many teams at the time. I knew from experience that the senior stakeholders would want to track progress tightly. However, this did not worry me since I knew exactly how to coach the product owner on how to communicate progress and build a release plan that would give us the best possible starting point. The new product owner, Martha, did a good job of organizing key people for the meeting. The creative director would attend for the first part of the meeting to explain the concept and set the vision for the first release of the product. He would then leave the rest of the room to discuss and estimate the release backlog. It so happened that the Scrum team was an unusual combination of job titles from the business's perspective. We had a new product owner taking over from an old one. Aubrey, at that time an assistant product manager, was also assisting the handover. This gave the impression of 3 product owners at times. There were also 3 designers, 2 testers, and 5 developers, as well as myself, the Scrum Master. In short, there were quite a large number of people at this time-boxed meeting. I was also working with a team that absolutely detested meetings. I could understand this since I had been a developer and understood what attracted them to the job. They were very much concerned with getting things done, working out logic, and problem solving. They were not concerned with lengthy discussions and comments. As a developer, I just happened to be different in that I enjoyed that. Martha told me in no uncertain terms that she was feeling pressured to get estimates for the business in that meeting. I spent some time explaining that we could not get any reliable estimates until we had run at least 2 or 3 sprints. That way we could measure our average velocity. However, Martha didn't appear to be concerned with this. She was focused on using this estimation session as a means to derive and forecast a launch date. This all led to a tense feeling in the room as the product managers' and assistants' anxiety showed through. Once the creative presentation and discussion was complete, I decided to be as positive as possible and began the meeting on an upbeat note. "Right," I said. "Let's start planning. Martha, can you read the stories? And team, let's be ready to discuss before you estimate. We'll have to time box the meeting, so please be mindful of the time." Martha started the process, reading each story title and acceptance criteria before the team discussed and estimated. The team had been in the company no longer than 3 weeks. They had little idea how Scrum worked. Frankly, many of them had very little interest, and at times had made it clear that they were less than enthusiastic about the process. Given their outspoken characters, I knew that I had to handle any disagreements very diplomatically. After 30 minutes or so, we had discussed and estimated only a few stories in the backlog. The product managers were becoming conscious of the passing time. Aubrey stirred in his seat. He was frustrated from the moment we got in the room since he had just given up smoking. Martha was not the most patient person at the best of times. She began hurrying the team, and the product manager she was taking over from also expressed a need to keep the meeting moving. I could see that the temperature was rising and that the product managers were feeling the most pressure from the stakeholders. The team were feeling pressured from the product owners, and this was not helping the estimation session. The situation unraveled when one of the developers, Claire, decided that we needed a new story. I've noticed something," she said. "When we write all the code for these stories, we'll end up needing to create a new type of database and a handler. We should create a story to write the whole database and handler up front. That will save us time later." My agile principles came to mind. I knew that the most agile way to bring in large-scale changes was in small increments. In other words, instead of creating a large story for a database and handler, it would be better to build just what was necessary, part of the database and handler, to complete the story. I said, "I see what you mean, Claire. You could do it that way. What I would recommend rather than a separate technical story card is to include the setup of the database in one of the epics. When you take on your first story, you then do just enough work to get the first story done, including any setup. This way you take the hit for getting the database and handler created in the first story, but delay any unnecessary setup till you take on subsequent stories. That would be the more agile way to do it and would still allow us to deliver a working increment from the get-go. Claire was not convinced. Despite being cautious and diplomatic, my words were doing nothing but frustrating her. How dare I tell her to code, she thought. Are you telling me I can't create that story? She asked angrily. No, Claire, I'm just giving some advice on how best to go about this in an agile way, I replied. John decided to get involved. There's so much development experience in this room, we'd be fools not to listen to it. We know how to write code, and we've been doing it for years, he exclaimed. Exactly, Claire chipped in. Her words managed to convince everyone that I was actually a bully in the shape of a Scrum Master. The developers and product managers began to join the conversation. I could sense that the rest of the people in the room were becoming frustrated as time ticked on. The atmosphere was becoming tenser. I could see that there wasn't enough time to coach the team and finish estimating in one meeting. I decided that allowing Claire to raise the story was definitely not a showstopper and was not worth fighting in that meeting. Instead, I'd coach the team on agile principles outside of the meeting. Okay, Claire, I said. As I say, this is the more agile way to do it, but let us discuss it after the meeting. You can create the story, and we'll also bring it up in our retrospective. Claire wrote the story card feeling mildly satisfied, but still mildly frustrated. We continued discussing and estimating more stories. Now, it so happened that the team were very new to the project, new to the process, and new to the first release. This meant that there was a long period of discussion for each story. The meeting, scheduled for 4 hours, was quickly running out of time. The product managers and assistant were growing more frustrated by the minute. Guys, I've got to get a damn cigarette. I can't wait any longer, Aubrey exclaimed. He stormed out. We agreed to have a 5-minute break. The long meeting was not helping the situation. I had booked it for 4 hours because we wanted to get estimates that same day. There was now only 1 hour left and we had covered only a third of the backlog. I could see that we were not going to finish the meeting with a resolution, so, sensing the business's urgency, I decided to ask the team if they would prefer to stay another hour or go home. That way I was not forcing anyone to blow our time box, and I was not bowing to the business. The team, though frustrated, were keen to get planning out of the way and decided to stay another hour. This was going to take us to 18:30. Since company hours ended at 17:30, we would have worked 1 hour past the official end of the working day. Anxiety grew in the room as we discussed each and every story. Some of us, including me, used humor to soften the mood. Aubrey and the team looked the most frustrated, even though they were the people who were least aware of senior management's desire for estimates. The next hour passed and we still had not completed the backlog. Okay guys, I said, let's call it a day. The team got their stuff together quicker than I could say, thanks for your time, everyone. I reflected on the meeting while I prepared to leave. Scrum rules said that meetings should always be strictly time-boxed. We really should have stopped for the day as planned, but I put this to a vote. My intention was to alleviate the frustration of another meeting if people preferred to carry on. However, the outcome of the long meeting was even more frustrating. Sitting in a room with lots of debate and uncertainty for hours deserves a long rest. If I had just stuck to the strict time box, we would still have lived to see another day. On top of that, we still had not accomplished our goal of a fully estimated release backlog anyway. Lessons learned. Avoid the appearance of multiple product owners. Even though we had made it clear to the team that Martha was the product owner, the presence of 3 product managers in the room created more debate than necessary and amplified the frustration. I recommend having a quiet chat with the real product owner to emphasize that only 1 product owner should be at the meeting. If there's an extremely good case for 2, then only 1 should speak at the meeting. Time box meetings strictly. The Scrum Guide is very clear that meetings should be strictly time boxed. On top of that, working after hours reduces energy and enthusiasm since everyone is looking forward to going home. Sometimes the team will agree to work later, but inside they're frustrated. I recommend leaving any unfinished work for another day when the whole team is fresh, or take note of my next point. Experiment with splitting long meetings into multiple smaller meetings. In the release planning meeting, we use the first hour for a discussion of the creative vision. This could have been scheduled ahead of the release planning meeting. The other 3 hours of planning could also have been scheduled as 3 separate estimation meetings. I use a weekly product backlog grooming meeting for the release estimation and discussion, among other things, to ensure that the team are always on top of their game. This prevents the need for long meetings. However, there must be some forward thinking to ensure that this happens before the date set for release planning. Avoid lengthy coaching within meetings. There are often situations within meetings when people need a process explained. Once the conversation goes beyond explanation and becomes a lengthy debate or even an argument, there needs to be another solution. In this case, suggest taking the matter offline into another meeting or coaching session. This gives everyone some breathing space to understand your point, usually avoids rushed conversation in a time-boxed environment, and avoids delaying the meeting.